Welcome, Dianne.
Good morning, Deb.
We are doing a part two of a conversation that we had the other day. It was not a formal interview, and we had a lot of response. It was a couple of days, or it may have been the day that Leslie Van Houten had been released on parole and actually released from prison, which had not happened to anyone from the original trial before. So you were barraged with a lot of media requests, and we decided to do a video. But even though we've been interviewed before, we know each other really well. And so it was kind of more of a conversation. And the response was great. But I think people really want to hear more of your story, things that we may take a little bit for granted, because we're close to the story. We wrote the book together and have gotten to know each other. So I appreciate that you are willing to do another actual interview with me. Again, I'm Deborah Herman, and I hope that people will subscribe to this page because we plan to do more interviews. So thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate all the positive response that we got. I was really surprised by how many people tuned in.
Well, I think there's still a very strong interest. This event, in a way, just opened everything up again. I mean, there's been ongoing interest in your story, in the book, in Manson, but let's start off with what did this do for you, having everything back in the news?
Oh, it's been difficult, really, because it's like ripping the Band-Aid off or the scab off of this wound that uh, happened a long time ago, but it's, because the story is still moving forward or moving on and in all its depths, it really um, kind of threw me, really.
Yeah, it was very, as people can see from the first video that we did, it's very emotional. I was actually choking up. I read a portion of the book that, it was a while ago. I mean, we've been interviewed since then, but the book, we wrote it several years ago and I don't think you had read it again in such depth. And so I was very touched by your natural, I mean, I was sad. I was sad for you. I really saw how much it impacted you.
I was really surprised as well, because I had not, I remembered um like I said before, I remembered my overall response to what they told me, and that was that how gleeful they were. But as far as the details, I hadn't really reread in its entirety, but it really brought it back. It's like, yes, I remembered what they told me vividly, and from the rereading, and it just really surprised me how sad it made me feel. Even now, just thinking about it, it makes me, it kind of tears up my stomach in remembering how I felt, that these people that I loved, that had been my family, they had been my sisters. And I wasn't necessarily in love with all of them, but
No,
I was,
just like in a family.
it's a family. And that these people that I loved could have done such a brutal, been involved in such a brutal act, just blew my mind. It really did. And it made me realize just how really evil Charlie was.
Well, again, I'm so happy that you made the time to come back, because what I discovered in looking at the comments and the response and how many people were interested in watching our first video and our conversation was they really want to know your story and they want to hear it from you. So I'm going to take us back to some basic questions, so that you can put things into context for people. This may have been a long time ago, but in our country, in the world, this was a major event that it's kind of like we can remember before this happened and then after this happened. So why don't we begin with who were you before you met Charles Manson and before you joined the family? You know, you're a person. You had a life before that. What was it like?
Well, it depends on how far back we want to go. But, my parents had really this was all, yeah, a year before that. Well, before I met Charlie probably, I think it was in October. We had just been dropped out for maybe 2 months.
Who
My
were you
dad,
before that? Because you weren't born a hippie. In
no,
fact, the opposite. You liked school. You were a pretty normal, so to speak, kid. But what happened during those years before that led
well,
to your family dropping out?
we had lived in Minnesota. My dad was an artist. Um, he his studio burnt down, sent him into a depression. He left us, went to California. He was there for about 2 years, and then he kind of got his head back on, and he wanted his family back. And he had a good job with the General Telephone Company. And so my mom was thrilled to leave Minnesota. And so we moved to Santa Monica, and I was 12. I think I was 12 then. And so I did seventh and eighth grade at the local junior high. I really didn't like California. I really, when Christmas came around, I was very sad because I loved the snow, and I didn't like all the tall palm trees on our street, and I didn't like avocados. And we talked about computers. The neighbor was a young couple, and he worked for IBM.
Wow.
And he, right, and they were going to have a baby, and they were kind of my saving grace. I loved going over and visiting with them and talking with them. And he took me to his work, and we talked about computers, probably not as powerful as our phones are now, which took up a whole building. And
Wow,
they had
that's
to put in
huge.
those punched cards. I forget what they're called, but the
I
ones
think
with the
they're
little,
called punch cards.
could be. And he showed me how they would put that in the machine, and that would like do the programming. Or I can't remember exactly. All I know is that it was this huge building that composed this futuristic computer, which was really mind-blowing. So anyway, but then my dad, in his artistic endeavors, um, my parents got turned on to marijuana, and then he got connected with this underground newspaper, and he was helping them do some of their art, and like day glow posters and all of that. But anyway, that was the Oracle in LA, and some of them, they lost their lease. Some of them moved in with us, and a couple of my dad and one of the other guys decided that they were going to follow Timothy Leary's advice, which was, they were already turned on. Now they were tuning in to this alternative lifestyle, and then drop out, and my dad was really big on shirking materialism and keeping up with the Joneses and all of that. So they decided to buy these bread trucks and turn them into campers, and drop out. So that's what we did. That was the summer before high school. And anyway, so we just went down the road. The police moved us on to the next beach. At some point, we met this couple. They had a young child, and I was pushing them on the swing and invited us to come over and live at their house, and for the summer. And I ended up going to Big Sur with my parents, met a guy, went to San Francisco with him because I always wanted to go to San Francisco. Then when I made my way back to LA to find my parents again, they and this couple that we had met, they were all living at the hog farm.
Now
so that was kind of my experience, in between that summer, the summer of 67.
But an
really
interesting thing happened that I'd like you to mention, because it becomes key later. Your parents gave you permission to be on your own. How did that
That's
happen?
right. Well, when we were at this house, we took LSD, and I I heard God, who I felt was God, and maybe it was. I don't know, but I had this experience. I am on acid, so telling me it was time for me to leave home. I mean, it just a simple statement, which kind of blew me away, but excuse me. I decided to run it by my parents, and they wrote me a note. I had a note that said I was like an emancipated teenager to live with this couple.
But you were how old?
13.
13.
Yeah. Or was I 14? No, I was 14.
I think either way, to be
I was 14.
emancipated at 14, and it was really just a note. You didn't go to court. They didn't do anything official.
But it was nothing legal.
Right. And for 14 years old to suddenly decide to go leave home, you had to feel more grown up than what I consider a typical 14-year-old.
Well, I think according to my parents, I think that they considered me to be more grown up. I was the firstborn. I'd always been, I do it myself.
Yeah, that's
my
true.
My mom had to let go early on. I'd always been capable. I was a straight A student. So and I was independent. And at 13, okay, back when we were still living in Santa Monica, but we had these hippies moved in, and I went to the beach, and I was introduced to sex. I had sex at 13. And so I think that was, with older boys or young men, not like wantonly, but I had a couple of relationships before that. And so I think that added to the maturity. My dad was an intellectual. And so I was exposed to a higher level of parenting. I don't know. Higher level is not going to go over well. It's not the right thing, but they treated me more like an adult than they did their child.
Which, so, as it turned out, may not have been a great thing. And as you state in the book, some of your earlier experiences were not really consensual. And the right. I mean, we don't have to go into detail, but at that age, when you were starting to explore and being independent, you had some influences, I think, that were not setting you on a positive path necessarily?
Well, my parents were not the real warm, fuzzy, huggy variety. And I think that I remember wanting the affection. And so back then, wanting the affection would led to being taken advantage of, really.
Yeah,
If
I just
you,
wanted to make sure, because as we were unpacking a lot of your memories, and I don't know if people realize this, but when we wrote the book, you truly had not read a ton of books, you hadn't watched a lot of videos, nothing. We really mined just what you remembered and your memories and your experiences, and started to piece together how certain things unfolded that led you, that led you to Manson. So right before, first of all, I'm sure people are curious. What did you find when you were in San Francisco before you went back to the hog farm? What did it look like?
well,
Haight-Ashbury.
it was near Haight-Ashbury. Yeah, there was just lots of, you know, people in flowing clothes and flower, really the stereotype, flowers in their hair, and um, you know, smoking pot, um, playing guitar.
Yeah, that was what was happening. And
Yeah.
then tell us, how did you actually wind up with Charles Manson and the family? Because that's a very interesting twist of a story.
Um, when I found my way back to Los Angeles, and that's a whole big story too.
Yeah.
But read the book, and
Yeah.
and
I know it
it
takes a
gets
long time.
it gets detailed. Yeah, I mean, we don't want, people aren't going to listen to hours long interview here. So and please excuse Deb and me. We both like to interrupt each other because we're anxious to tell the story. But please just know that this is very a true conversation, really. And I want Deb to keep the story moving. So when I got back from San Francisco to Los Angeles looking for my parents, at that point I didn't know they were at the hog farm, but I found them and this couple that we had met on the beach, all living at the hog farm. And hog farm was on the top of a hill. The people in the community below did not like this commune at the top of the hill. They were preventing people from going up there. The people at the hog farm, of course, were afraid of being raided by the police for whatever reason. Lots of young musicians were coming up there, and I was a sexually active female. And so I was considered jailbait. And the leader of the commune, Wavy Gravy, and his wife talked to me, and I'm not sure that they talked to my parents about this first, just came to me and made me feel like I wasn't really welcome there. I wasn't, unless I slept in the attic of the house, and I didn't really want to do that. And since I'd been on my own, my parents weren't really like chaperoning me or keeping an eye. They had they gave me my independence, and they were letting me be independent. And all the adults at the hog farm were kind of responsible for looking after all the children, like it takes a village, which Hillary Clinton coined, but that still was kind of the basis. And there weren't other kids my age. And even my brother, who was, 12, and my sister, who was like 9, even the three of us were older than most of the kids were babies or toddlers. So Anyway, I think that Hugh Romney and Bonnie Jean, I think they sent a couple of their friends up that lived somewhere else, and they invited me to come and live with them. And it was through, so I did, and I was only there like a week maybe, and they suggested that I go with them to this spiral staircase house, which I'd actually lived at previously with this couple from the beach. And they said, you know, we want you to meet this guy. And I don't think they even mentioned his name and a group of girls.
They
And so
said,
they had met him
forgive
somewhere.
the interruption, but from what I remember, you want to meet someone groovy.
Right. Yeah, that's what
That's what they
that's
said
what
to
they
you. You
said.
want to meet someone groovy.
Right.
Very,
So
very 60s.
we went down there, and uh I walked up the stairs, and I think it was Lynette who greeted me, and like, Dianne, you know, it was like she knew my name. It was like, what? And Charlie, Dianne is here. And so I just was immediately blown away, really. And Charlie got up from the circle, offered me a drink of his root beer, and we weren't drinkers. They really weren't drinkers. I mean, maybe some of the guys drank a beer or something, but I don't remember ever really drinking a beer in the group, right? So he offered me a drink of his root beer, and so this is our Dianne, and I was just like really
It was kind of what you
flabbergasted.
needed.
I felt real, yes, because here I had just been kind of rejected from where my parents were, that commune, right? And here I walk into this commune, or yeah, at that point I didn't really know it was a commune. It was a, you know, it was a party, but obviously Charlie was the leader, and they just, I mean, literally totally embraced me.
And it looked very magical.
It
But
felt very
and
magical.
felt very magical. But what was the story behind how they knew your name in reality?
Oh, apparently they had gone, the Charlie and the girls had gone up to the hog farm because, you know, one commune knew about other communes, and he probably wanted to join anyway. He was called Black Bus Charlie back then, and he'd gone up there several times. But on one of his visits, he met my parents and ended up taking a little sojourn out into the desert looking for gas tanks, which Charlie was always, he was obsessed with gas. And but I was in San Francisco at the time. He mentioned to my mom that they were going to be going to San Francisco. And so she gave them my picture. And my picture is how they knew me, because they did go to San Francisco, and apparently they did look for me.
So and I think when you first met Charles Manson, we've talked about how it's like he could look at someone and know what they needed and be that for them. And did that happen for you when you first met him?
Obviously, it did, because he made me feel very welcome. He made me feel very loved, and he made me feel like a woman as opposed to a child, or a, you know, a young teenager, which I was.
Yeah.
But
So what were the early days like? You at this point, you now, although again, we're skipping ahead. At this point, let's say you're with them. You've decided to be with them. You're going with them different places, and you've become one of the girls. So those early days were not like what it became later. What was it like in those early days?
we traveled around making music, traveled around mostly Topanga. Um, when I actually, we can uh, back up just a hair, and that is I went back and forth between Charlie and the girls and the hog farm, because I, you know, I didn't immediately jump in. but then they were going to take a bus trip to New Mexico and Arizona, and I didn't want to be left behind, really was the bottom line. I didn't want to be left behind. So I believe it was in December. It was just before Christmas. And so we hopped on the bus and we did that little trip. The bus broke down in Winslow, Arizona.
Oh, wow. It's a song.
I know. Yeah, I know. Anyway, and it was cold. It was, it was like we were freezing and it was snowing and we were waiting for the bus to be fixed. But anyway, so we ended up back in Topanga, and in Topanga we lived in several different locations, abandoned houses, or I don't know what the behind the scenes. I know one of the houses that we lived in was like abandoned, but we lived in a couple of places in Topanga Canyon, um and then we were decided we should move on. Probably the people that owned the houses or whatever kicked us out, or we had to move on. And so we went up the coast and in the buses and we ended up in, people have heard this before, but we were arrested. Mary Bruner had just had her baby relatively, shortly before that. And we were arrested for trespassing. And at that point, I had to pay fake ID. And that, I don't know if it really helped or not, because they suspected it was fake and they took it away, or they didn't give it back, whatever. Anyway, so from there, then I think from there we found Spahn Ranch. Somebody introduced us to Spahn Ranch. So we ended up at Spahn Ranch out in Simi Valley, Chatsworth area.
So how did you all survive? What did you eat? What did you do? And how did Charles Manson orchestrate all of that?
Well, he introduced us to dumpster diving. There was a lot, or somebody did. I remember it being Charlie. It's like, get rid of your inhibitions, just jump in. And we found amazing amount of good food that the grocery store, I don't know if they had expiration dates then, but they would just probably, it'd been on the shelf for a week, and so it was time to throw it out. A new batch came in, whatever their process was. But we did find quite a bit of food there, and we made friends with the Helms bakery man, and he would come and bring us his day old stuff that he didn't sell. So we had always had tons of that. And then people would come and that had money, and so we'd go to the store and buy groceries, but mostly it was given to us, or we got it out of the dumpster.
What does it mean to postulate?
Charlie would talk about postulating all the time, and that was basically positive thinking about something you needed or wanted.
And would you get those things?
Frequently we did. And so it made Charlie look like really magical. Now, now that I'm older and more mature, I'm thinking that was probably a manipulation. He already, we needed something, wanted something, gas, food, clothing, and he would manipulate somebody else into providing that and make it look like he was magical. I don't know. It just
Yeah. So there was a lot of magical, mystical, like a magical mystery tour, in those early years, where it must have seemed really exciting.
right. Charlie was writing songs and singing songs. We took LSD at Spahn Ranch. I loved going out for walks up into the hills. And I mean, but there was a lot of time was spent feeding, clothing, and taking care of your personal business. We needed water. Spahn Ranch had a little creek that back then it seemed to me that it was running most of the time. So that we had water, and then, there was the property, George Spahn's property had running water. And so there was a little restroom outhouse thing that, we could take a shower, but you could also bathe in the creek. And I remember there was a waterfall. So, but, getting food, preparing food, there were some children. So they had needs.
But
That's
so at that
life.
point, yeah, at that point, you were living in a commune, seemed fun. Everybody was loving each other, and loving Charlie, or Charles May. I didn't want to call him Charlie because I didn't know him personally. But early on, he would do his speeches or his pontificating. Was there an indication early on about his increasing paranoia or his apocalyptic view? Because that became very important later.
From the very beginning, he would talk about this coming race war, and he'd learned about that in prison.
So do you think that he really believed it?
Yes, I do. I mean, at least what he conveyed to us, he was concerned. This is coming. This is real. This is happening. He heard it on the grapevine, in the prison, that this was something that, the black man was called back then, it was stirring. This was something that was, some uprising was going to happen. So he talked about that early
Right from the
on, and
beginning,
yeah,
pretty much. So this wasn't something that happened like right before the crimes.
right. And it wasn't a big emphasis. It was just he was, you know, philosophizing and, telling us what he'd learned in prison.
So, so looking back, how do you think he really got everyone to follow him? Because I think to this day, people don't understand the process, of how he was collecting followers and how he was gaining loyalty from the people who were with him.
I think it was a whole mix of things. I mean, he had this uncanny ability to read people. But he used it for his own survival or his own purposes at that point. I'm not sure what the purpose was, but I think primarily it was, his own survival. And when he came out of prison, it was like the summer of love. And, he'd been tutored by pimps on, you know, uh, at the prison, and that's what he wanted to do. And I guess he tried to do that before, but, unsuccessful. So when he came out, it was like, gosh, he hardly needed to employ any of those exercises, because free love was the name of the game, really. But I think that what he did learn was how to talk to people, and especially women, uh, where he made each one of us feel like we were it. We were his favorite. We were, very, very special. And he just had that ability to kind of capture you like that. And he was kind of fun. A lot of the time he was fun and kind of impish, and he had this curly hair, and he's he was a small man, so he didn't have this huge physical presence, or a big booming voice or anything, but he was just subtle. And I think he'd learned how to fill in the gaps. I mean, if we, a lot of us All of us girls were broken somehow. We'd been kicked out, disenfranchised, maybe even abused. And he was able to fill in the blanks. And he was a very gentle and loving lover. And I didn't feel taken advantage of, I mean, there was a couple of times, but for the most part, it was like he taught us to do this give and take. And so that, along with the music and the postulating and all of that, and then he also wove in, philosophical, biblical principles, Scientology, all of that mystical stuff that he just bits and pieces, but to the naive, it just made sense. And then we weren't in competition. The women weren't in competition with each other for his attention that I was really aware of. Maybe we were on a certain level, but he taught us or trained us to not be that way, that to share, and the different orgies, love-ins that we had were all part of that training. Is that we didn't like couple off. It wasn't just those two over there or those two over there, and it wasn't just male and female. It was female and female, male. I think he covered it all.
And but he still became the central orchestrator, like he
Definitely.
was, right?
Yes, definitely he was, because he was the one that pushed or nudged or suggested, commanded. I mean, it was all of those things.
Like a puppet master.
Yes.
Yeah, in a way. So when did you notice things start to change or become more where he became more paranoid, or things became a little more stressful? And did you ever talk to any of the other women about anything you observed that was changing? Or was it sort of like you didn't talk to each other about Charlie? Again, I said it about Manson. Do you need me to break that question up?
No, that's okay. We were at Spahn Ranch, and then we were introduced to Death Valley, right? And we went up there. But before that, I mean, when Tex joined the family, and it just started getting bigger, and dune buggies started coming into the picture, maybe with one or whatever, and outposts. But there was an incident at some point in that, when we were at the ranch. I think that, like, Charlie wanted more money, and so we tried to do a nightclub in the saloon. But I think also, Tex and maybe some other factions were doing some drug deals, and maybe, and some went bad. I think that's what ended up happening to Hinman, was a result of a bad drug deal.
Gary Hinman being the man that was murdered by Bobby Beausoleil.
Right. But
there is so much to unpack about these was it 3 years, 2 years leading up to the crimes? So much to unpack, so many things that unfolded, and twists and turns. I mean, we haven't even talked about Manson and Dennis Wilson. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because
did I answer the last question?
I don't know. We'll go back.
Well, I mean, yeah, let's go back to that, because just he did change. I mean, at some point he had topographical maps, and he was looking for not necessarily unmarked, but a way to get from Spahn Ranch to Death Valley, to the Barker Ranch, without, going on like major highways, so that's what he wanted to do. And I ended up getting left there, not accidentally, but I was tasked with staying at Barker Ranch. And then Bobby was looking for a way back. And this was before the whole Hinman thing happened. But things were starting to escalate. And when I went with Bobby, and instead of going to Spahn Ranch, we were at Gresham Street, which it was nicknamed the Yellow Submarine House, which I knew nothing about until we'd landed there. And that's when I noticed the big change, because now the Straight Satan motorcycle group is on board, and there's knives and there's guns, and they're actually stealing Beetles, Volkswagen Beetle bugs, and turning them into dune buggies. And so it was really frenetic. And Charlie was absolutely furious with me. What are you doing here? I told you to stay in the desert. And so that's when I really saw the change. And then the White Album came out, or had been out. And that's when I was first introduced to the White Album, although people have said, no, it was before that, but that's what I remember. I don't remember hearing the White Album before that, but Charlie played it forwards and backwards and slow. And he was sure that the Beatles were confirming his supposition about this race war. And so then that's how Helter Skelter came on the scene, was through the White Album that the Beatles had produced. And Charlie was sure that they were talking to him.
And from your observation, he really did seem to believe it. He was delusional. He wasn't making it up. He really felt that the Beatles were talking to him, which is, for someone who's in a delusion, they can start to think that everything is connected. So at that point, but I think we're missing part of the story. When, in relationship to Gresham, when did you go to Dennis Wilson's house? Was that before?
Yes.
So prior to Gresham Street, when things really started to escalate, where Manson was wanting more money and he's trying to raise money and he's becoming more paranoid, he had a recording session with Dennis Wilson, and you actually lived there at Dennis Wilson's house. What was that like?
Oh, well, that was part of the Magical Mystery Tour for sure. Is Dennis had picked up a couple of the girls in the family, and hitchhiking to Spahn Ranch, and so he met Charlie, and they kind of instantly bonded, really, through music. And I remember Dennis took me, and I think Ruth, and was Ruth on the scene? I don't remember. But it was me, I think Nancy Pittman, and somebody else took us to the Colorado River. He was going to like some kind of a family get together. I think it was probably Memorial Day at that point. So that was really fun. We slept on the beach, we slept in a hotel, and we went in his Rolls Royce. So that was really, fun. And the family was kind of like, they're not sure they really were accepting.
You mean Dennis Wilson's family?
Dennis Wilson's family, right. But by the end of the trip, they shared their food, barbecue, and we rode in their boats, and, anyway. So yeah, that was all part of
So that was a high point.
That was definitely a high point. Yeah, I loved his house. His house was just the house and the grounds. It was an old Will Rogers estate, and it was just big logs and huge fireplace and a guest house and a pool, and it was just a big. I remember like redwood trees, and there was a swing, and expansive lawn. It was just a beautiful place. And Dennis had lots of musicians that would come over, and he proudly introduced Charlie to them, at least in the beginning. And Charlie was teaching Dennis how to play the guitar.
Which some people might find strange, but Dennis Wilson was a drummer. He
He was
wasn't
a
a
drummer.
guitarist. So
Right. He was a drummer and a surfer. He was apparently the only real surfer in the group.
in the group. And Manson had a recording. You were present for a recording session that he had with Dennis Wilson, where it didn't go so well. But it wasn't because of them, was it? It was more because of him. Do you
That's
remember
I
what
mean,
you observed?
I was we went to Brian's house,
Mm-hmm.
kind of up the street from Dennis's, off of Sunset. And I was swimming in the pool, and Charlie was in the recording studio. And next thing I know is Charlie's at the pool, girls, get out, get dressed, get out, we're leaving. And we kind of like tore out of there. And it wasn't until later, that I realized that there'd been a confrontation. And really, I'm not sure what it was, but it was that Charlie did not want to do what they wanted him to do. He needed total autonomy. Whether it was the chords that they were playing, what they wanted him to wear, what the words that he wanted to sing. It was all of those things he would not, bend to their what they wanted to do with him. And I think that they were looking for some musical talent. And I think that they did realize that Charlie had some talent, but he wasn't willing to be molded into what they wanted. And so, and I don't know that, I think I've heard various other accounts of what happened there, but personally, I don't have that. I don't have that first person knowledge. But yeah, it definitely caused a rift. And that's the basis really for my comments about people thinking Charlie wanted to be a rock star. Well, I think he did, but he wasn't willing to. If he really wanted to do that, I think he would have stuck a carrot up his nose, or shaved his head, or whatever, right? If that really was
he was very into his specific message, his
yes,
specific philosophy, which supports the idea that he was really losing his mind. He was believing that he was man's son.
yes, which he used to reiterate all the time. And he had some kind of crucifixion experience, I think, in San Francisco on LSD. And so, and he would reenact that for us periodically, for a group of people on acid. And really he could make you think that you could see the stigmata, the holes in his hands, but that's the power of suggestion on LSD.
Wow. So
Yeah.
So there's so many details. That's why people have been studying this for so many years. And it's really a blessing that you were there. And also, you're not a person who will make an assumption about something that you didn't have firsthand knowledge about. But looking back, right leading up to August 8th and 9th of 1969, those were the 2 days of the murders. And again, we're skipping a lot of details and a lot of things that you experienced up until then. But right before then, did you notice anything that led you to believe that something like that could happen or was going to happen?
No, I didn't, but I was also kind of on the outside now because I didn't obey Charlie in staying in the desert. And so I was, kind of a hanger-oner, I guess. I was still part of the family, but, I wasn't part of the inner circle. But the girls, were going out on these creepy crawling missions where they would dress in black and they'd go to people's houses. And as far as I know or knew, they weren't stealing things. Charlie had just tasked them with sneaking in and out of people's houses, having eating some food, rearranging the furniture, just to mess with people's minds, and maybe, hindsight, maybe that was part of a preparation for, I don't know, for preparing against the race war, or or just playing. He loved to play mind games with people, with us, with other people. And so he was definitely, he was definitely preparing them for something, and I was never asked to do it.
But you weren't exactly someone who listened to him very much. Didn't you
Right.
didn't you find out later from someone who was there that you used to just like get up and walk around and roll your eyes? And so I don't think he would have trusted you, thank goodness.
Yes. Thank you, God. Thank you, God, for making me who I
And
am.
making you a what do they call it? Something defiant. You were always defiant. And not one that was, going to follow blindly, especially things that were against your nature. So really, things were heating up. You saw more people there. You saw more, more dune buggies. But at that point, you didn't even know that anything had happened to Gary Hinman. Nothing. You were just taking care of the babies and things like that.
Right. Yeah. And, cleaning, I don't know. I like things clean. I still like things clean and organized. And, so there's always a need for that.
Yeah, so you kept busy, and although didn't you receive some training, combat training? If
We did. I was part of a group, a little knife lesson that Charlie gave. He gave us at some point. Everybody had a buck knife, maybe a 6-inch buck knife of some variety, and he always had one on him, which I think he really had one on most of when I knew him. But that was back then. That was very common for men carried some kind of a knife, to peel an apple or
Swiss
whatever. I
Army,
mean,
but
yeah.
these buck knives, they did not look like,
These
they
were
look
a
like
little
you
bigger
could
than
kill a bear.
I don't think we could kill a bear. But anyway, he gave us a little lesson about the most effective way to to stab somebody with a knife and kill them. And he said, and because he'd love to play these mind games, I'm thinking that, and I think he even said it, is that you've got to be willing to kill in order to not be killed. Well, that kind of makes sense,
To a
right? I
14,
mean,
15-year-old mind.
if there's a war going on, or some kind of a battle, if you don't want to be killed and you have a weapon, you need to know how to use it in order to not be killed yourself. So that kind of made sense to me. It's not something that, most of uh, hippiedom would have embraced at all. But anyway, there were more guns and knives around, and I think I hid my buck knife like under the mattress or something. I didn't want to carry a buck knife.
It doesn't seem to suit your personality from what I know. I always say you were a flower child in a garden of weeds, when you were back there. There are
Well, that's
still
what
some,
I love to do that. I mean,
yeah.
everywhere I went, I was just a wanderer, check out the caves, the wildflowers. I went on a fast where I only had honey and lemon water. So
You were kind of a genuine hippie. There's still so much to cover. I just don't think we can cover it in this video. I hope people will subscribe and will, send us questions. I put the address in, I'll put it in the description if there's more they want to know. But I guess to finish today's discussion, um, you know, there's a reason why you did not want to respond to Leslie Van Houten's release. Now, I know people are wondering, you talked a little bit about that in the beginning, but in the last video we did, I read a passage from the book, and you hadn't looked at it in many years, and you had a very visceral, emotional reaction, that made you cry and was making me cry. So you knew her back then. And what was your memory? You didn't know. So now you were whisked off after the crimes. You were whisked off to Barker Ranch. So let's talk about that briefly and how you found out what actually had happened, in your words.
right. Well, yeah, didn't know what had happened. I had woke up to Leslie burning stuff, which turned out to be from the LaBiancas. And, a car came down the road. She said, "Don't let them see me." They just gave me a ride from Griffith Park. And so I was, the next thing I know, I'm being whisked off to Olancha, which was kind of like the gateway to Death Valley, to where it was often a meeting place where we would take off together, because it takes a lot of people to get the vehicles up Goler Wash. And anyway, so it was there that Tex showed me the newspaper with the headlines about the LaBianca Tate murders. And he slapped the paper and he said, "I did this. Charlie told me to." And I was just, it's like, my whole world, the rug of my world had been pulled out from under me. I just could not, believe that it had gone to this, to this point where Charlie had asked people to murder for him. It just was inconceivable. And now I'm afraid to leave. It's like, oh my gosh, if they could kill people, I could be killed. And now that I know this truth, so it was really scary. And then we went up to the desert, and that's when the girls started telling me their participation, and your reading of that passage just really brought it home. I remembered then so vividly being there at Willow Springs, and the girls telling me kind of gleefully their participation, and I just could not believe that they had done that. That didn't seem like there was any horror or remorse or regret that they had done that. It really was painful, and I still could cry. Just, these were people that I loved. These were people that I had actually physically loved and mentally loved and emotionally loved. And yes, it wasn't quite as mystical, magical, and beautiful as it was in the beginning, but I had still been holding on to that truth. right? That was still why I stayed there, is because I wanted to feel that love again. And so anyway, I just was totally blown away at that truth. And then the rereading, and now her getting out, and people can read the comments and understand the controversy of of you know now what, now what for her, and people's reaction, and even my own reaction is um conflicted. I am conflicted. So I don't want to make a response other than that. Yes, it's extremely controversial. It's painful. It's painful no matter how you look at it. It was an extremely painful event, and so that's my comment. It is extremely painful, and people have to search their own souls and be, comfortable or accepting of how they feel. And I totally understand both sides.
Well, Dianne, there's so much again to your experience, your story, and you so bravely share it in your book. I'm sure that we could talk again. I so thank you for your words and understand fully that this changed. It's an event that changed the world. And even though it's so many years ago, I'm sure it feels like yesterday. Your life, it's something that changed your life forever. So I appreciate that you're willing to talk about it. And cults still happen today, and there are other cults that have had tragic results. So talking about it's an important thing. We need to bring these things out in the open. Anything you'd like to say before we close?
Just, thank you for your guidance, Deb. And it's hard to, you know and we always interrupt each other, I mean, or talk over each other. So I hope
Finish
the
each other's
audience,
sentences, like right now.
yeah, always. And so it's just the way we have coined the term collaboration. Instead of collaboration, it was a collaboration.
It really
So
was. So
yeah, anyway, I'm blessed to have Deb in my life, to be the co-author of my story. And the people that we've met along the way, I've got to say thank you to kenmains. He was, if anybody goes to his station or his channel, whatever it's called, because we're both really new to this whole online YouTube podcast thing, but I really appreciated the comments that he made. And he even said he interviewed me and he interrupted me all the time. And it's anyway.
it's
So
so
that's
easy to
all.
do because there's so much.
There's
There's
so
so
much.
much.
There is. And this is probably, gone way too long. It'll be amazing if people listen to the end, but
Well, if
I'm
you
amazed.
do, then
Yeah.
you are special and we thank you. And we'll see you again. This is
Okay.
Deborah Herman and Dianne saying
Until next time.
until next time.